Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now, if you've got a taste for the underdog, you can't get much further than the Celestial Lions. These guys were absolutely decimated by the Inquisition for having dared defy them, and I believe most sources list them as having just 98 operational Astartes at this point in time, whichever that happens to be in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. We'll talk a little bit about that as we get on. Now, the head here and the shoulder pad, they are both 3D prints, and there's going to be a little information on them in the description. I do recommend, if you want to get your hands on these, to have a read down there. Links and everything will be included. As well, all of the paints will be listed in the description too, so let's get started. So, first things first, once your Marine is assembled, first thing to do is to prime him. And here I've used a spray of Retributor Armour. You could just as easily use a silver or even a light grey, even a bone sort of colour, because we're going to paint over the top of it now with some Retributor Armour from the pot anyway. You'll see as this goes on, it is a little bit warmer, a little bit more rich, and it's also super useful for getting into any areas that you might have missed with the primer. You don't want to just hammer on the miniature until it's covered and obscure all of that detail. So the primer is really just there to give you something for the paint to key onto, but it being the right colour, it will help in the long run. So away we go, big old brush, it doesn't matter too much which one you're using. Retributor Armour over our Retributor Armour. I'll give that a little bit of time to dry. Obviously if you're painting 5 Marines or so at a time, this method does become a lot quicker. What I'm going to do now is to shade the armour, and there's 2 ways you can go about this. If you want a darker finish, what I'd recommend is you can use here instead Agrax Earthshade. And I'd recommend go check out the speed painting Stormcast video I did a while back, because the colours there are going to be pretty similar to our Celestial Lion here. It's going to give you a, not grimy, but an older looking, almost brassy finish to the gold. Not quite what I want in this case, but it does look very cool, and it's worth checking out if you want an alternative to this warmer look. Instead, what I've got is Reikland Flesh Shade, and we're going to apply this over all of the armour. Now, you don't need to drown him in this, so that's way too much. I'll move that around real quick. You just want to make sure that you're getting this into all of the recesses, and big pools of it on the flat armour aren't going to matter too much, because we are going to dry brush this in a little bit. But for now, we're just going to paint the whole thing in Reikland Flesh Shade, and it's going to give us a nice warm gold finish once it dries. Now, it is important that you leave that to dry for as long as possible in order to make sure that all of the very deepest recesses are properly dry. If you have any little patches that are still wet when we come to this dry brushing stage, it's going to be a disaster, because you'll pick up the shade that's in the recesses, you'll smear it around, it's not going to be a good result at all. So dry is important here. Now, speaking of dry, this is Sigmarite, which is one of the dry paints, and I'm using here, this is a Luxe Smoky Shader. Grab yourself a pack of makeup brushes. These are the best things for dry brushing. And all you need to do is I'm going to start on the pack here, and just lightly brush across this a few times. Now, Sigmarite's kind of deceptive, because you will very quickly put a lot of it on without really noticing. So it pays to apply a few brushes of it and then turn around and have a look at the rest of the miniature and think, okay, that's about as much as I want. What we're doing here is really adding colour to the top layer. We're adding a bit of volume to the armour here. And yeah, I'm going to dry brush the entire miniature. Now at this point, he's going to look a little bit dusty, which, you have to believe me, is what we want. And when we varnish this dude, that's going to disappear. What we'll move on to now is a little bit of Necron Compound, and this we're going to use to catch just the edges of some of this gold detail. So you want to work most of this off, and again, a nice small makeup brush or a small dry brush will do the job here. So again, I want to catch just the edges. So I'm going to hold this dude. It's a little easier to get at these things from an angle, and I will slowly build up that color and get a nice sharp silver edge. All right, so looking where it's going to be a little more visible, let's just pass over that area a few times to build up that silver. And there we go. I think you'll see there, we start getting that nice edge. So what I'm going to do is cruise around all of the gold armor and just lightly flick to catch those raised details. And in that way, we're going to get a really nice, rich gold, but without having to do any complex highlighting. Now that gives you a nice, rich gold. And later on, I might do a couple of final silver highlights in 1 or 2 spots. But for your bulk infantry, this is definitely going to do the job. We'll move on now to some of the other base coats, and here I'm going to start with the blue. I've got here McCrag blue, which might seem a little light, but we're going to shade it anyhow. Don't worry if you hit the line, if you've got a 3D printed pad or something. Just fill in the blue, and remember, the same will work for their helmets as well. Now that will definitely take you 2 coats to get a nice solid color. I've chosen to do the knee pad here because I've seen a few folks doing one of the knee pads in blue. The right one always just, I don't know, it feels natural to me. That's why I've gone for that. What we'll move on to now is some of the black details. I'm going to do these in 2 stages. There are soft black details like the leather and the undersuit, and then there's going to be hard black details like his weaponry. So for the soft black, what I'm using here is black gray from Vallejo. This is basically Eshin gray. Where can we get into here? There we go. But the coverage on it is much better. So if you can't get your hands on this, Eshin gray will work perfectly well in its place, but you will ordinarily need to apply a couple of coats of that. Now the one exception to the soft details was that I've also painted in the chest eagle with that black gray. Because I'm going to shade it and do a little bit of highlighting to it later, I want a little more visual volume than just flat black, but for the guns and such, it's not going to matter. And for the same reason as the Vallejo black gray, I'm using here Vallejo's black to cover over the weaponry and any other bits that I want to be a really hard dark black, and I think you'll see exactly why. One of the things I found really interesting while I was looking up, I wanted to know a little bit more about the Celestial Lions, and I found in a couple of White Dwarfs they mentioned something called Torchbearer fleets, which were put together by Gilliman at the outset of the Indomitus Crusade, and they were each about 300 to 400 combat-ready Marines, and the idea was that they would go looking for chapters that had been, irreparably damaged in some way. They were either destroyed, and the Imperium needed to know their eventual fate, or they were down to the last handful of Marines and they needed help rebuilding. And what was going to do that better than a fleet showing up with Marines and apothecaries and tech Marines all ready to rock and roll? So I really like the idea of, here goes one of these fleets looking for the Celestial Lions, because if Gilliman ever finds out that there is a chapter that was sort of deliberately decimated, almost completely destroyed by the Inquisition, as an example to other Space Marine chapters for what happens when you go against the will of the Inquisition, it's kind of a sly move on his part to just turn around and go, nah, we're undoing that. We do things my way. The Inquisition can go hang. And I thought that was kind of cool. So that's why I've chosen to do this guy as a Primaris Marine, because I like the idea that rather than succumbing and eventually dying out, these guys instead end up with a little bit of help and the ability to completely reforge the chapter, to stick it to the man. Now once that's applied, we can start putting on the silver details. Now for this, I'm going to use Iron Hand Steel, because this is quite a nice light silvery color, and when we shade it, we're not going to have to do a lot more to it if we don't want to. You can of course highlight it, but for bits on his backpack here and all that sort of thing, you're not going to need to, I would say. As well, just flick them around. Most of these little decor parts you'll have on a Marine, they ordinarily tend to be painted in gold. But if we leave this one gold, it's just going to disappear, so a little silver here won't hurt. Don't forget the little dealy bops, like on the side of his head and on the helmets. Obviously, if your dude's not wearing a helmet, you won't have to worry about that too much. We're getting down now to the last couple of base coats. So I'm going to apply here a couple of coats of Ushabti bone to all of the purity seals. I'm going to go straight over the wax here as well. You'll see this does cover fairly well over a gold primer, but anywhere that we do need to come back, a second coat won't be too difficult. It doesn't need to be red. You can use any color you like here, of course, but a splash of red I don't think is going to hurt at this stage. Now this stage won't be applicable to every marine, and I will drop a link in the description to where you can get some really good decals for Celestial Lions. But a little bit of white scar here, just over the, over the lion. It's a little one-dimensional at the moment. That'll change when we shade things. And generally I do still recommend transfers are the way to go, even as somebody who has a printer. What I've got here, this is Vallejo's Saddle Brown, and I'm going to use this to base coat his skin. You can use Catachan flesh and such like that, but I tend to find this gives a slightly warmer skin tone overall, while still being nice and dark. The description of one of the Celestial Lions in the Grimaldus book does mention them having quite a warm dark skin, so I want to try and stick to that as much as possible. Now that is all of those base coats applied at last. From here you could just bathe everything in Agrax Earthshade, but I reckon it's probably going to look nicer if we do use some Nuln Oil on some of these areas. So I'm going to use it on the black stuff, both the hard and soft black, but I'm going to switch to a smaller brush to get into the undersuit and what have you. And with the smaller brush as well, I'm going to go over the shoulder pads, but very carefully. And when you're applying a big splodge like this, just guide it towards the corners. And remember that wherever you lift away your brush is where you're going to get a blob of paint. So try using that to steer your shade. And while that dries, we'll apply some Agrax Earthshade to the other details. So the purity seals, the skin, and don't worry too much on some of these silver details. If you have to do them with the Agrax, it's not going to matter. In fact, it'll probably add a little bit more volume. Now once those coats have dried, we can get back to the business of highlighting. Now when it comes to the purity seals, it's not too much of a much. Just go back to the colors that we base coated them with and add a little bit of those over the top to highlight. Now when it comes to blue, like on the helmets, you can leave it like it is. You could even go back with a little bit of the Macragge blue from earlier and layer that up, but I don't think we're going to need to. I quite like the dark blue that the shade gives us. What I'm going to highlight with is a little bit of Hoeth blue, and I'm using the edge of my brush. Oh gosh, that's quite thick. Yeah, you know what, I'm going to have to fix this. So I'm going to finish laying down the highlights, and then come back in a second here. And, oh god, that's thick. Yeah, let's fix that. Alright, so back to some Macragge blue, and we'll thin this out just a little more than usual, and we can use this to paint back over the edge of the panel there and straighten out some of these highlights. Now this will of course end up being lighter than the shaded blue, so I'm going to have to fill out a little of that middle section so it doesn't stand out quite so much. And at the same time, what I'm going to do is go back with some of the white and brighten up the chapter badge as well. Like I said, transfers, man, they're going to be the way to go here. Now we're going to use Mahogany Brown, which is another nice warm brown from Vallejo. What I'm going to do with this is basically the same as the old Bugman's, Cadian, Kislev Flesh Trio, which is to paint over most of the skin here with this slightly lighter brown, and leave a little bit of the shaded stuff in the recesses. Now to highlight that, I've mixed into that Mahogany Brown about half again in Cadian Flesh Tone. So it's going to be quite warm, quite light. Don't want to go overboard with it, but just areas like his brows, his nose, his cheekbones, and his chin. If you want to highlight the chest eagle, what I recommend is take some Mechanicus Standard Grey and thin it down a little more than you ordinarily would. What we'll do is just a few little driblets, extremely technical term here, just on the very tips of the wings. Now I will quickly point out, if you do want to highlight the ribbing in the undersuit or any of the other soft black details like his equipment, then a little highlight of Storm Vermin fur will do you well there. I'm not going to, though. What I have is some Necron compound. We're going to go all the way back there. And make sure you've got most of it off your brush here. Really small, raggedy old brush, and just lightly flick it along the edges of the weaponry. Because with this you can highlight both the guns and the silver parts at the same time. If you're a little worried and you end up with too much silver, what you can do is just null oil over the black again. Now, finally, in the realm of not strictly necessary but will look cool, what I've got is a little Stormhost silver. And I'm going to just touch in some of the extreme edges of our gold armor. The beautiful thing here is you don't need a perfect straight line. Just have a tiny wee bit on your brush, and you're kind of dabbing a little rough edge to make it look as though this wonderful sharp gold armor has just caught some detail, being dinged a little bit. So it's battle damage without going the route of actual damage. So once I've added as much of this as I like, what I'm going to do is take him outside. I'm going to hit him with a matte varnish. Although I would recommend for your own stuff, a satin varnish will look a little nicer. Matte just photographs easier. Then I'll apply his base, and I'll pop the recipe for that in the description. Pop his decals on him, and let's get a look at what he looks like when he is all finished. And there at last, our Celestial Lion is complete. Now, whether you can find 3D printed shoulder pads, make your own, or you've got access to decals that you want to use, those last splashes of white really do help sell a Marine. Those little extra bits, they're everything to me. They really finish off even a very simple paint job like we've done today. So as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of the wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my producers, Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Rod, and Jimmy. Your support lets me keep buying Space Marines, folks. Any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.